Some mornings stay with you for life. I was tightening the bridle on Old June, my pregnant mare, when Scout, my cattle dog, let out a low growl. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't the wind. I looked up and saw it, a 12-foot steel fence topped, with barbed wire stretched across the front gate of my ranch, land that had stood strong through 3 generations. Behind that fence stood a group of grinning suits, and then I saw the sign. Property of Willow Creek HOA. No ranchers allowed. They thought I'd back down. They had no idea. They'd just challenged the man who wrote the land use laws for this entire county. There was no warning. That morning, I had just cinched the saddle in June, my old mare now heavy with foal, when I heard the metallic roar in the distance. No need to guess the screech of metal cutters, the growl of diesel engines. By the time I reached the dirt road leading into Red Ridge Ranch, our family ranch for 3 generations, it was already there, a 12-foot-high steel fence lined with razor wire like a prison yard, planted squarely across the only entrance to the ranch, and on the other side of that fence, a group of well-dressed, slick-haired folks laughing like they'd just closed a $1 million deal. Their name? Willow Bend HOA. A homeowners association I never joined, and legally never had to answer to. One woman stepped out from the group, hair curled to perfection, wearing a scarlet-red power suit like she'd walked off a Hollywood set. Linda Barrett, the HOA president. She placed a hand on her hip and smiled that smug, sugar-coated grin that cuts sharper than barbed wire. "Good morning, Mr. McAllen," she said, voice sweet as honey and cold as a switchblade. "I think it's time you considered joining the community." I didn't answer. I just walked up to the fence where they'd welded a white metal sign. Property of Willow Bend HOA. Members only. Scout, my old shepherd dog, sat growling in the back of my pickup truck. He knew, same as I did, this wasn't some minor administrative mix-up. 2 months ago, I thought I'd live out my days peacefully on Red Ridge Ranch. No politics, no paperwork, just grass, wind, and the steady rhythm of hooves against sacred soil. Then Linda showed up, clipboard in hand, movie star sunglasses, and that plastic grin that made my stomach turn. "Mr. McAllen, your ranch entrance overlaps Willow Bend's internal road. That technically makes you part of the community, and we'd be thrilled to welcome you." I glanced at the packet she offered. HOA fees? $950 a month? No pets, no barns, no fences taller than 4 feet, no roosters before 7 a.m. I shut the folder and handed it back. "I've had chickens here since my dad drove a '58 Ford. If anyone needs to assimilate, it's you folks." The smile vanished. She turned and walked away. But I knew, someone like Linda Barrett doesn't walk away from an insult. She reloads. The next week, I got a letter citing excessive odor from livestock. The week after, a violation notice for unregistered animals. Then came the accusation that Scout was a threat to neighborhood children. I scoffed. What children? Willow Bend was over a mile of dusty road away. No one just wandered into Red Ridge by accident. Then I noticed survey flags, tiny red markers staked along the edge of my land. I confronted the surveyors. They stammered something about verifying boundary lines at the request of the HOA. That's when I knew. This wasn't about paperwork anymore. This was an invasion. And like any man worth his boots, I didn't back down. I started digging trenches, checking my ammo, and waiting for nightfall. I thought a little resistance would make them retreat. I was wrong. By the time I got back from the county office, the fence was up, and Linda, along with her goons, was standing there, toasting champagne like they'd conquered an unclaimed frontier. That was the moment I decided. No one puts a fence on my land ever again, and they'll regret it. For generations. And if anyone in Willow Creek thought they could throw up a fence on my land without consequences, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson. The next morning, I was up before the sun. Long before the light touched the eastern ridge, stood by the steel fence with a rolled-up land deed in my hand, an original copy passed down by my grandfather, legally verified and preserved for 3 generations. Scout lay beside me, silent, his eyes sharp as a Bowie knife staring through the gaps in the metal. That fence they built, over 12 feet high, concrete-footed, topped with barbed wire, looked more like a detention camp than a property line. And I knew exactly why they picked this spot. It blocked the only access to my West Side stables, where I kept my pregnant mare, a purebred worth more than the entire HOA block put together. But I didn't act. Not yet. I headed back to the house, sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the internal county systems I still had full access to as a land commissioner of Rockland County. I didn't need permission. I wrote the zoning policy, I approved the overlays, and what I found on that screen made the corner of my mouth curl into a grin. Willow Creek HOA had failed to renew their legal status for 11 months, which meant every enforcement action they'd issued was legally null and void. I picked up the phone and called the county recorder's office. It's Carson. I need every permit file, construction authorization, and boundary plat linked to the Willow Creek HOA, every version, every amendment, every survey. Right away, sir, the voice on the other end snapped to attention like a soldier. Izzy, something wrong? I think these folks just stepped on a snake, I replied, voice flat as cold steel. And it's getting ready to bite back. That afternoon, I drove straight down to the county building. Every step I took down that polished hallway, I could hear Linda Barrett's smug laugh echoing in my head. The kind of laugh that belongs to someone who thinks they live above the law, too blind to realize she's looking at the man who wrote the law. At the records desk, I asked for original and revised plat maps, construction permits, and zoning filings, especially for that clubhouse they conveniently expanded near my boundary line. When the maps came out, there it was in black and white. Their actual HOA boundary was 20 feet away from the fence they'd built. 20 feet, precisely on the strip I used for rotational livestock grazing, a use protected under state level, agricultural code. I stared at that sheet of paper. Then I smiled. The kind of smile that says we're about to restore the natural order of things. When I got home, a bright yellow notice was taped to my front door. Warning, unauthorized access. Road, violation of HOA policy. I tore it down without reading past the second line. Scout growled. I patted his head. It's all right, buddy. They don't know who we are yet, but they're about to. And that evening, under the soft porch light of my old ranch house, I drafted my first official complaint, not as a rancher, but signed and stamped as the land commissioner of Rockland County. I didn't need threats. I just needed to follow the procedure. And in this county, I am the procedure. The next morning, I was up early, like always. My coffee was still steaming when the phone rang. It was Carl, my old neighbor, and his voice. Had that edge I knew too well. Jake, you'd better come out here. Some strangers just pulled up in 3 pickups at the edge of the fence. One of them's carrying a power drill. Looks like they're about to do something stupid. I set my cup down. No time to enjoy it. I walked out. Scout leapt into the passenger seat, like he could sense what was coming. When I arrived, it looked exactly like an indictment. 3 men in reflective vests with HOA Enforcement Patrol printed across their backs. Each one held a clipboard, gloves, and the kind of posture you'd expect from someone serving a warrant, not patrolling a neighborhood, and in the middle of them, as always, stood Linda Morrison. Sunglasses on, hair pinned high, her tailored black suit shimmering under the morning sun. Next to her was Mitch, her go-to lackey, carefully marking the fence line with red spray paint. I stepped out of the truck, calm but firm. What exactly are you doing on my property? Linda turned without flinching. Conducting a damage assessment for the HOA fencing that's been tampered with. Under Section 4.2 of Willow Creek Community Guidelines. I let out a sharp laugh. Section 4.2 of an HOA that's been legally inactive since last October. She raised an eyebrow, still defiant. We're in the process of renewal. All actions are still valid under our internal governance. Wrong, I cut in. I've checked. Your registration is expired. You haven't been recertified by the county. Any enforcement actions completely illegal. I pulled out my phone and started recording. I swept the camera from Mitch, drilling, into the concrete footing, to Linda, pretending she still had control of the situation. Then I spoke clearly to the lens. This is documented evidence of trespassing, impersonating a legal authority, and unauthorized construction on verified private land according to the Rockland County Land Registry. Linda quickly motioned to Mitch to stop. Stop that. Jake, you're blowing this way out of proportion. I haven't even started, I replied, eyes never leaving the lens. I stepped toward them, slowly, deliberately. From my back pocket, I pulled out my wallet and flipped it open, right in Mitch's face. There it was, my land commissioner badge, gold seal gleaming like high noon. Mitch took a step back. Linda's confidence wavered. We didn't realize you were still active? In office, she muttered. You should have checked before building a fence on a commissioner's land, I said. Now it's too late. I called the local structures department right there on speaker. I need an immediate verification on the construction permit for the HOA Willow Creek perimeter fence. The voice on the other end was quick. There's no record of any active permit matching that description. None. Zero Linda's face began to tighten. She turned toward Mitch, whispered something in panic. But I didn't let them move an inch further. You have 24 hours to remove every nail, every panel, and every trace of this operation from Red Creek Acres. If not, I'll request a court-issued removal order and pursue formal charges. Mitch muttered a quiet curse. Linda gritted her teeth. You think you'll win just because of that badge? I don't need to win, I said. I just need the law to be enforced. And out here, I am the law. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, eyes on the steel fence casting a shadow in the moonlight. Scout lay at my feet, ears twitching. At the occasional gust of wind, I knew Linda wasn't done, and that only made me more ready than ever. When people think of war, they imagine gunfire, bombs, or at least a heated courtroom. But out here, where red clay holds sweat like ink, and laws are written with ink but kept with blood, war can start with a letter. And that letter arrived. On Monday morning, I just fed Scout when I heard an engine in the distance. A silver pickup, no front plates, rolled up to the gate of Red Creek Ranch. A woman stepped out, short hair, sunglasses, leather file case in hand. I knew the type of sight, a civil contractor. Not the government, but bold enough to knock. On any damn door she pleased, she walked up, held out a sealed yellow envelope. Jake Carson? Depends who's asking, I said, hand near my hip, where my Glock usually rested, though today I'd left it inside. I'm acting on behalf of Willow Creek HOA's legal team. This is formal notice of an active investigation into potential building code violations concerning Red Creek Acres. I smirked. You came all the way out here to tell me I'm raising cattle without permission? Mr. Carson, refusal to cooperate may be considered obstruction. We'll return with law enforcement if necessary. She dropped the envelope on the porch step, spun on her heel, and walked briskly back to her truck. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I looked west, across the pasture, where June, my most prized mare, stood in the sun, and thought, they're loading the first round. I opened the envelope inside. Inside was a set of documents, professionally forged, titled in bold, Community Health and Safety Assessment. 3 violations listed. Livestock shelter did not meet aesthetic environmental standards. Water system lacked a safety certificate, even though I'd serviced the filters 3 weeks ago. Animals too close to residential boundaries, raising concerns over noise, odor, and potential intrusion. At the bottom, a cease and desist. Order on all agricultural operations effective in 48 hours. I laughed, not bitterly, Not amused, just the cold, quiet kind of laugh a man makes when he's already buried a traitor right at the boundary line of his grandfather's land. So they, "Want war? Fine." I drove straight to town. First stop, Rockland County Legal Resource Center. I met with Tanya, head of Land Resource Compliance. Used to be my intern back in the day. First thing she said when she saw me, "HOA trouble again, Jake." I dropped the forged documents on her desk. "Can you verify who signed this?" She squinted at the signature, sighed. "That name doesn't exist in the system. And that seal? From a 2018 form set. Revoked years ago. So it's forged government paperwork. Not just that, Jake. If they sent this to any other property owners, that's large-scale fraud." I nodded. Then it's time someone turned the cameras. Back on the HOA. Step 2. Professional retaliation. I filed for an emergency audit of Willow Creek HOA's finances, 5 years' worth. As County Land Commissioner, I had the authority if there was evidence of misuse or zoning abuse. I also filed an injunction to freeze all pending HOA development, including the expansion of that community center Linda was so proud of on the front page of the local rag. Then I called the Rockland Daily Post, sent an email to Travis, the young reporter who'd torn open the Meadow Glen zoning scandal. He called back within 2 hours, voice electric. "You're taking on an HOA?" "I'm in." That evening I sat on the porch. Scout lay at my feet. Crickets hummed across the fields, but all I could hear was tomorrow's thunder. A day when the HOA would no longer be the hunter, but the hunted. Because I'm not just protecting land, I'm protecting the truth. And I know how to turn numbers into ammunition, paperwork into battlegrounds. Wednesday morning. Just 3 days after that forged cease and desist letter, I was locked and loaded, not with barbed wire or bolt cutters, but with the one thing HOAs fear most, the truth, stamped and backed by law. I started the day by driving to the county seat with Carl, my old trusted friend and a living witness to everything I was about to expose. Scout rode in the back seat, head resting on the window like he already knew we were about to tear through forged documents like soft clay. We entered the Land Commission hearing room carrying a USB drive, a binder as thick as a 1985 phone book, and a plan that had no reverse gear. Tanya had already set up the projector. Travis, the young reporter I trusted, was behind the lens. At the front sat 3 county commissioners, including newly elected Helen Knox. She was the one who once said during her campaign, "No semi-civil organization is going to steal farmland on my watch." Now was the time to see if she meant it. Started the presentation the same way I'd trained fresh land inspectors years ago. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to complain. I'm here to provide proof that the Willow Creek HOA not only overstepped, but violated state law, the Agricultural Land Protection Act, and even committed document fraud. I laid down 3 stacks of evidence, land records, verified GPS maps showing that the 12-foot metal fence they installed cuts across the access road into my ranch, land that is fully within my agricultural easement and legally mine, expired HOA, registration. Documentation confirming that Willow Creek HOA failed to renew its legal status with the state for over 14 months. Forged documents. The fake community health order they sent me, along with signature mismatches, tampered stamps, and file codes that led nowhere. Tanya advanced the slides. On the screen, aerial photos, GPS overlays from my dashcam, and county parcel maps. Lined up to a T. The room was silent. Then Helen spoke. "Mr. Carson, just to confirm, you're saying this is your land, zoned agricultural, and they built a fence with no permits?" I nodded and held up my own zoning approval from 3 years ago, and I was the one who signed that zoning map. Another commissioner leaned back, brow furrowed. "So, if the HOA erected a fence on your land without legal authority, what does that mean?" It means they committed unlawful encroachment onto agricultural land, installed an unauthorized structure, and blocked legal access for veterinary service, livestock transport, and agricultural safety. That's a direct violation of the 1994 Agricultural Production Protection Act. The tone in the room shifted from passive observation to active outrage. But the knockout blow came last. I plugged in the USB, played the video, Linda Morrison, HOA. President, standing at the edge of my property, giving orders to dismantle a small wooden bridge that led to the west pasture. We're removing unauthorized structures threatening community aesthetics. Her voice echoed across the room. Then, footage of me holding up my county badge, bright gold in the afternoon sun, calling the sheriff's department. Clear, calm, and legal. Lastly, footage of the $12,000 fine I'd received, delivered, by a HOA representative, with a fake badge, fake name, and fake credentials. I looked the commissioners in the eye. This isn't about fences anymore. This is organized coercion, impersonation of government authority, and attempted extortion under the guise of administrative enforcement. And they believed me. By that very afternoon, the county launched an official investigation. All HOA files were frozen from public access. Their community center expansion project halted. That night, Travis ran the headline, "The Imposter and the Farmer's Bridge. Ho caught trespassing on private land." The story spread like wildfire. Neighbors began posting pictures of fences, fake violation letters they'd received. And me, Jake Carson, I wasn't alone anymore. Back home, I poured a glass of bourbon and sat on the porch. Carl stood beside me, nodding. "That was the first cannon blast, Jake," I replied, "and I'm just getting started." I knew Linda Morrison wouldn't back down. People like her don't know how to retreat. They only know how to make others kneel. And just as I predicted, less than 72 hours after the article, "The Farmer's Bridge" exploded across local media. She struck again. That morning, I found a health hazard notice posted on the wooden gate of Red Creek Acres. A giant red stamp, bold capital letters read, "Property condemned, unsafe for human habitation." Below it, a scribbled signature of someone I'd never heard of. David Harlow, HOA Health and Safety Officer. First, the HOA doesn't employ any authorized health personnel. Second, I'm the one who signs off on all official appointments in the county. Third, I knew for a fact that David Harlow doesn't exist in any state or county personnel registry. They were impersonating government authority, and now the game has crossed the line. I didn't tear down the sign. I left it up as evidence. That evening, I sat on the porch, Scout resting by my feet, and called an old contact, Melora Jenkins, a former prosecutor from the State Attorney General's office. "Melora, I need help. They're using forged documents to exert coercion, barricades, fake health warnings, and now fake officials." "Jake," she said, her voice cold as steel, "if they touch your property again, I'll help you prepare a criminal case." And then they touched it. The next morning, Carl ran up to my porch, phone in hand, face pale. "They've set up a checkpoint, right in the middle of the public road." I jumped in my truck, and sure enough, in front of me was a group of people wearing black jackets with bold white letters, HOA Enforcement Patrol, a folding table in the middle of the road, plastic barriers. One guy even held a megaphone. "All vehicles entering Red Creek must present HOA permits. Violations will be recorded and subject to administrative action." I pulled over, grabbed my phone, and started filming. "You are blocking a public road. You have no legal authority to set up a checkpoint." One guy in the group, Mitch, the same guy from the barn inspection, shouted back, "This is an emergency action, voted by the community." "There is no legal order authorizing you to trespass on a state-managed road," I said. "And you've just committed 3 crimes. Impersonating public officials, obstructing public infrastructure, and threatening a legal landowner." I called the sheriff. "Sheriff Landry, I've got a fake checkpoint on a public road. About..." 5 people, one with a megaphone, wearing fake agency jackets and making threats. "We've had 3 other reports this morning," he replied. "Patrol is en route. Record everything. And Jake, yeah? Don't let them leave." When the police arrived, Mitch and his crew froze. A female deputy stepped out, ordered them to remove their jackets, and confiscated all inspection permits. A laptop was seized at the scene, used to print those fines from a Word template. The group was detained for investigation under impersonation of public officials. And as the SUV hauled them away, I walked back and began removing each fake health sign they had posted along the ranch boundary. At that moment, I knew I had just sprung the trap. That night, I sent every file, videos, photos, copies of the warning, signs, the fake notices, the audio recording of the checkpoint, to Melora. "Tomorrow night," she texted back, "the first criminal case will be filed with the district attorney's office. Jake, we're not just defending a ranch. We're cleaning out a rotten system. But like I said, people like Linda don't retreat." And sure enough, as I was drafting the report, Carl called again, voice hoarse. "Jake, someone's cut through the back fence. I saw flashlights around 2 a.m. I shot to my feet. Scout was already alert. I grabbed my flashlight and the shotgun leaning beside the door. "All right, Linda just stepped onto the wrong patch of dirt for the last time." I grabbed my shotgun and flipped on the flashlight, sprinting straight out into the yard. Smoke, a streak of fire, was blazing next to the hay barn. Broken glass was scattered across the ground, the stench of gasoline thick in the air. A Molotov cocktail. If it hadn't been for the automatic sprinkler system I'd installed last season, that flame would have torched the entire barn, livestock, feed, and the bloodline of horses I'd spent 10 years building. This time, they weren't just trying to take my land. They were trying to erase my legacy. I called the police. The evidence was clear. Broken bottle, tire tracks, security camera footage showing a figure fleeing over the fence. There was no need to guess. I knew who was behind it. But the name that came up in the investigation chilled me to the bone. Roger Knox, not Linda, not Mitch, but the founder of Willow Creek, a man once banned from practicing real estate development after a scandal in another state. And now he was back, like a ghost behind shell companies, trying to seize Red Creek like it was his final chess piece. Travis, the young reporter I'd worked with earlier, sent over new documents he'd just dug up from the shell company network. Turns out, Knox was listed as the hidden beneficiary in at least 3 fraudulent land transfers across the county, all tied to HOA projects. And the fake deed to Red Creek I found? The signature wasn't Linda's. It was mine. A near-perfect forgery done by a professional. I exhaled, cold and slow. He didn't just want to threaten me, he wanted to wipe me off the map. The very next morning, I sent the entire case file to the State Attorney General's office. I also contacted AgNet, the national watchdog for agricultural land ethics. Within 24 hours, Roger Knox's name was placed on the National Real Estate Fraud Watch List, and that's when the floodgates opened. An unmarked envelope arrived at Carl's house with a dead snake inside. At my front gate, someone clipped a scrap of paper to the fence. "You should have taken the deal. No more subtle threats needed." I called the sheriff directly. "We'll increase patrols around Red Creek," the deputy responded. "And if you'd like, we can install an emergency panic alarm at your home." I declined. "I'm not afraid," I said. "I just want the truth, and one chance to expose it." I stood by the newly restored wooden gate, my hand resting gently on the freshly rehung Red Creek Acres sign. The morning breeze carried the scent of wet grass across the pasture behind me, and Scout lay by my boots, ears perked like he still sensed something unfinished. Linda Morrison had been arrested. Roger Knox, the mastermind behind it all, was cuffed at the airport, trying to flee the state under a false identity. The entire Willow Creek HOA was now just a bad memory, wiped clean from the county map. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't raise banners or give speeches at City Hall. I just went back to my work, rebuilding the fence, checking on the livestock, letting my soul settle with every hoofbeat on the red soil, because I knew this story wasn't just mine. Soon after Travis Riley's article went wide, dozens of letters flooded into my office from farmers, veterans, elderly folks living alone, people who'd been threatened, cornered, or robbed of their land by HOAs they didn't understand because someone else knew the rules better. One old man from Texas wrote, "They took my beekeeping land after throwing up a fence and said it didn't meet hygiene standards. Like I hadn't lived there for 30 years. I couldn't reply to them all, but I read every word. And I understood. If I fell, there'd be 100 more crushed beneath the same weight. That HOA didn't just want to control land, it wanted to control people. So I did one last thing. I hosted a community meeting. No microphones, no stage, just folding chairs scattered across the grass beside my house. Folks came from all across the county, some driving 3 hours just to be there. They brought iced tea, cookies, and their stories. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't give a speech. I said just one thing. We're not helpless citizens under HOA control. We are landowners, and from this day forward, no one gets to take away what our grandparents left behind just because they printed a paper with a fake seal. The crowd applauded, but I didn't smile. I proposed a new initiative, a civil alliance, the Red Creek Pact. Anyone who had ever been harassed, threatened, or forced to sell by an HOA could come to us. Lawyers, reporters, and folks like me, we'd stand behind them. And then something unexpected happened. The next week, I got a call from the governor's office. They invited me to join the State Agricultural Land Protection Commission to help write stricter regulations on HOAs across the state and stop another Linda Morrison before she ever got started. I said yes, not for the recognition, but because I wanted the kids in this state to grow up riding horses across pastures without having to apply for a landscape aesthetics permit. 3 months later, Red Creek Acres was thriving again. The livestock were strong, and Scout had finally learned to rest under the oak tree instead of chasing down every black SUV that cruised by the trail. The field where the steel fence once stood was now a community garden, where Willow Creek residents and ranchers planted side by side and shared what they grew. Linda was awaiting trial. Knox was under federal investigation for dozens of fraud cases. And I still woke before sunrise, hand-brewed my coffee, and opened the gate to let the light in. But I never forget. I still keep cameras at the entrance. Still read every legal envelope that lands in my mailbox. And every time I see a stranger stop, in front of the old fence post, reading the No HOA Trespassing sign, I walk up, place a hand on their shoulder, and say, "The law is real. But justice is something you protect with your own 2 hands. Have you ever been threatened by an HOA? Ever seen a fence go up, not for safety, but for arrogance? If you've ever thought you were alone, remember, what they build with overreach, we can tear down with truth. And if they underestimate you, they don't know who they're dealing with. Stand up, because some of us don't back down, and storms often come from the direction they least expect." I didn't fight for revenge. I stood for every inch of dirt my father and grandfather left behind, for every drop of sweat I poured into that land under the sun. I'm not a hero, just a man who doesn't know how to be afraid and refuses to bow. And now, as Scout sleeps, under the oak tree, as the fields turn green again, as old neighbors return to sow and harvest side by side, I know we didn't just win this fight. We rebuilt something HOA had long forgotten. Trust. They can build fences, post fines, forge laws, but they'll never get past a man who knows his boundaries and dares to defend it.